All right, friends, we're ready to go with Holy Week. All right, those of you who are here at the 8 o'clock, we have kicked it off, and we will do the same at the 10:15 in a few minutes. My hope to this morning is to talk through it a little bit, give you a little bit, just a few little factoids about these various services to help enrich your appreciation of them and your experience of them, but really to just sort of talk you through, this is what we do, this is why we do it, so that you can understand a little more what's happening when you're there. I'm working from the principle that maybe perhaps unsurprisingly as a priest, these are my favorite services of the entire year. This week is our Super Bowl week, and it's why we do this work, right? The story is that foundational and that central and that moving, if you allow yourself to get into it and really hear it. So that was true for me in my own experience of the church and religiously, particularly as I was beginning the sense of a call to the priesthood. Spent a very profound Holy Week, perhaps I think for the first time attending all three services, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then into Easter Sunday. And that was a real clarifying moment for me personally. I grew up in a parish that observed Maundy Thursday with the foot washing in a very formalized way, but I remember as a young adult, not a young adult, as a teenager, they would, you were in a parish where they would select a few people to have their feet washed. I don't know if you've been in a parish that does that, but instead of having everybody do it, they select a few for the priest to wash, and I got selected to do that, and I was surprised, thoroughly surprised by how powerful a moment that was, even for a teenage kid. My mom and I had the tradition on Maundy Thursday. She insisted that we take a shift at a vigil that didn't go all night, but went until midnight. So we'll talk a little bit about that practice of watching in the garden. So she would drag us back up out of the house and, put some shoes back on, put some pants back on, and let's go. And we'd go back up to church and sit quietly in the church for 30 minutes to an hour. And that felt really annoying at the time, but was one of those things that as a kid, right? Those little things that you as a parent sometimes are able to accomplish, where you plant a seed in a really fertile place that will continue to blossom over the lifetime of the individual. Good Friday is my favorite day of the year in terms of what it tells us and what it is about. And then the Easter Vigil have got some great stories of that as well. So all of that to say, I think everybody should be at every Holy Week service, so I'm working from that bias. I'm just naming my context, so to speak, here. I know that that's not always practical or feasible, but I do believe they are that important. So my hope is today we will inspire you, and you will go inspire others, so that we'll have a nice full church this whole week, not just today and next Sunday as well. But we do start with Palm Sunday, and this is one of the main things I want you to take away from today is just how old many of these liturgies are. These are not things that have emerged late in the 20th century, and et cetera, et cetera. Some of the practices have been recovered as we've gotten better at this better scholarship around liturgy and church practices. So there may have been some practices that disappeared for a while that have been brought back in recent memory, but these services, particularly the observance of this week in Jerusalem through these holy days, dates back to they're older than even the regular form of worship that we have on Sunday mornings. So these practices of a triumphal procession walking down from the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem in a ceremonial way, going up to the mount where they believed Jesus was crucified, having services there, then going to the tomb, having services there. They were walking this way in a ritualized form from the early hundreds. So less than a few hundred years, before Constantine, a lot of them. And there is an account of a woman in the 380s writing about her experience of Holy Week in Jerusalem, which affirms these practices were already well in place in many of these places. So just know that as we go. And so it does start with Palm Sunday and this woman Eugenia's account in the 380s about this triumphal procession where people would take branches of palm and swing them around, and they would sing, a lot of them, All Glory, Laud, and Honor, because it's a 9th century hymn, the words for that. So maybe not in the 300s they were singing that, but within a few hundred years after that, they were singing this hymn, not to this tune necessarily, but these words were what people were chanting and singing as they went in this procession, which we will do in our very modified way, but at the same time trying to capture both the moment from the Scripture and at the same time the moment of practice that had evolved from then. Interestingly, the Liturgy of the Palms, and so Palm Sunday has these two things. It is called the Sunday of the Passion, Palm Sunday, or Palm Sunday, the Sunday of the Passion. It has two names, and if you have been to a Palm Sunday service, you know it has this weird dual nature to it. And it starts with this triumphal procession. I have made the choice here, it's something we've used in other places, to put the reading of the Passion at the end of the liturgy as opposed to in the place of the Gospel, where it is, if you've been in other churches, that's where it is sometimes put, which is right in terms of our order of things, Old Testament, Psalm, Epistle, Gospel. But to me, makes the service more of a whiplash between the triumphal procession, the Passion, the Eucharist, and so you're going back and forth. So for me, it emphasizes the point to have it at the end and leave open the fact that we are entering into Holy Week, having just heard this whole story. So that's a change that we have made here, but they bookend the service, right? The Palms and the Passion on either end of the service itself. And those things have been joined together on this particular Sunday before Easter for a long time. This is not something that the 79 prayer book said, well, we need to do this and we need to do that. Some people would say, I was raised with the idea that they read the whole Passion on Palm Sunday because they don't believe anyone's going to come to church on Good Friday to hear it again. And so they need to hear it at least once. They need to hear it at least once before Easter. So Palm Sunday is your best chance. That's not actually true. This Sunday was, the sort of narrative was read as a part of the practice for a long time. But interestingly, the blessing of the palms, all of that was taken out during the Reformation. Remember, the Reformation emerges in a very sort of anti-Catholic mode, right? So this idea of services where you are blessing things and you are enacting things in a very stylized liturgical way was not so cool. So they were like, no, we can do away with that. Let's just read, and talk. So that's what they were about as they moved through that. The other thing that's interesting to know is that this bifurcation of the service, including the Passion, dates to the medieval times. The other thing that's interesting to note is that as we get deeper into the liturgy, you notice that the blessing of the palms is then, you have this, you're sort of alluded to the story that is to come from Isaiah. That's what I'm going to talk about, the prophet. And if you remember that chapter 50 of Isaiah, where we talk about the suffering servant, when we had our sessions on Isaiah a few months ago, those are some of those very interesting passages wherein you're wondering, who is Isaiah talking about? Because Jesus ends up embodying or inhabiting much of this prophecy, but we also know from the historical context that Isaiah was writing in, and this is chapter 50, so remember this is 2nd Isaiah, that this first reading comes from, is the time when they are in exile. So who is suffering here? And what is he predicting? Or what is he describing? Those are just interesting questions to have. And then you have the reading from Philippians, which is the great Christ hymn, they call it. Though Jesus, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but humbled himself, taking on the form of the slave and being obedient unto death, even death on the cross. They think this was actually one of the earliest hymns of the church. So you'll see it sort of in your Bibles, it's often set off almost poetically because it's almost like a creed, almost like a hymn that the earliest church would be singing or saying to try to understand the nature of Jesus in this. So those are the two readings you get that are sort of in between these major pillars on either side of it. Obviously, we don't have big branches. We keep a more practical little palm for people to have and to hold on to. But those of you who I hope remember from Mardi Gras, those palms are then what we hope people will bring back the evening before Ash Wednesday, that then they get burnt and turned into the ashes for Ash Wednesday as well. So there's a cyclical nature to this story the way there's a cyclical nature to our liturgical year, our church year. So that's Palm Sunday in a nutshell, and I know that's not everything about it, but we have a bunch of other services to do. Questions about Palm Sunday before moving on to other ones? From those of you who maybe just experienced it, or those who have experienced it in other places where it's different, things you wonder. Okay. Well, it is, you may be interested to know, probably Jared and I were talking about this earlier, probably our best attended service other than Easter on a Sunday, unless Christmas were to fall on a Sunday in the year. So there is a sense in people's minds. I think people love getting stuff at church. That's what I've kind of learned. They really like ashes. They really like palms. They like, Easter, and they get that, but they'll get like some jelly beans or something. We give candy canes out at Christmas. I think that might be the motivation. They like a little takeaway for that. Ed, yeah.
Yeah. One thing that we used to do, and I don't know if they still do it again, was we used to get together with the other churches and do, at the other end of Stockton Garden, do a procession back to the church.
Yes.
That was always nice, but
it's nice. That fell victim to the devil of logistics. Not everybody has their service at the same time, and so trying to get everybody, like First Pres has got 9 and 11. Ghent it starts at 10, not 10:15, and so all of a sudden you're trying to ask everybody to tell their people for this one Sunday, which is your second biggest Sunday of the year, get the message out to folks to come early or at a different time and meet in a different place, and so it becomes hard. I've been in other places too where you start outside and process into the church. We've talked about that. We've thought about that. The reality is, with the number of people we have, it would probably take a half an hour to get everybody from outside through our doors into their pews, and that just felt like a little too much to ask. So, plus some people start inside and some people are outside, so it kind of bifurcates the congregation in the beginning. So we'll be doing it all inside, walking in our circles this morning. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of Holy Week we're going to be keeping. They have special lessons appointed for each of those days that focus on those events in that last week leading up to to Maundy Thursday, to that Last Supper. So Jesus comes into Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover on Palm Sunday, and then has a week, or almost a week, before he is arrested, tried, crucified, etc. So those days, you'll get selections. You'll get Wednesday is called Spy Wednesday because it focuses on Judas. You get the stories of him in Bethany with Lazarus and Mary and Martha. Some of those stories as well. So those are brief spoken services happening at 5:30 on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of Holy Week, which are demarcated as specific days. They're not just random weekdays within the life of the church. But that all leads up to what we call Maundy Thursday, the name Maundy coming from mandatum, novum mandatum, the new commandment that is given as a part of that, as a part of the recitation of John's version of that last night, which talks about, but doesn't have the words of institution for the Last Supper, the way that Luke and Matthew do, but talks about the foot washing, the washing of the feet. I give you a new commandment that you love one another as I have loved you, as I have loved you. I'm going to show you an object lesson for the teachers out there, right? So this day, did I say Good Friday was my favorite service? This one might be my favorite service because there's so much going on. It starts as a normal liturgy. It's white. The color is one of celebration. We've got the candles back. We'll maybe put a few flowers on actually we won't because we got to take them away. But you can set the thing as a Sunday morning because you're starting in that place of celebratory meal with your friends and then ending in a very dark place as well. Originally, though, in the earliest centuries, there was no Eucharist celebrated in that week between Palm Sunday and Easter. But the Last Supper commemoration then entered the picture to say, look, if communion is going to be such an important part of our life of the church, we need to celebrate its first day, its maiden voyage, so to speak. And they did it a lot longer than we do it. There's like a long meal, and then they go overnight the vigil to watch in the garden, and then they begin Good Friday. So, this service, this is the other thing I wanted to say. The 3 holy days that we call the Great Triduum, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, are understood in the life of the church to be one continuous service. There is no dismissal at the end of Thursday's service, Friday's service, and then there is one at the Easter Vigil on Saturday, because that completes the whole thing. But you have to think of it that way, because originally it almost was, right? People would come on Thursday night to start, and then they would go through the evenings, and they would have things to do on Friday all day long. That's Good Friday, right? And then they would come through Friday, and they'd have a little bit of rest, but they'd be back on Saturday for another overnight vigil into Sunday morning. So the whole thing was prolonged and extended around that as well. And they would go, as I said, from the Mount of Olives down into Jerusalem, retracing those very steps that Jesus himself took. And they would read on Good Friday the John Passion the way we do, the John version of the Passion, the way that we do. But we'll get to that in a second. But so from a very early point, when they started bringing in this idea of the institution of the Lord's Supper and the idea of foot washing from the John Gospel, those two things were a part of this Maundy Thursday service. Now, how the foot washing was done has varied in time and place, and that was another thing that was taken away for a long time. Sort of post-medieval through the Reformation into the 20th century. I don't know if any of you grew up in Episcopal churches where that was not a thing. Did anybody grow up in an Episcopal church where foot washing was like, Maundy Thursday was about the Lord's Supper, right? It was about the institution of communion and the Last Supper. In the 79 prayer book, because of the more contemporary liturgical scholarship, they put it back in as an option. People have always been a little squeamish about the foot washing. Some people have always been really squeamish about the foot washing. The church itself has been too. Catholic. It's too Catholic, right? Right, Kevin? Yeah.
By the way, can I just ask, Maundy, is that Latin?
Yes, it's an English manifestation of a Latin word. So Maundy is not Latin, but mandatum is Latin. And so when they say this is the night we commemorate the mandatum, the new commandment, it became Maundy Thursday, which as a kid you think is Monday Thursday, which is confusing, right? Yeah, so the church doesn't do us any favors on that. But we do. We observe the foot washing, right? We go ahead and we do it. And and that is intentionally, not just because I had my own profound experience having my feet washed, but because I think it really is what we are asked to do if we take Jesus at his word. All of a sudden, people who argue for the literalism of the Bible all of a sudden say, no, we can't do that. That's too literal. And so I think there's a wonderful way in which it invites each of us to participate in that act, both in the doing of it and in the receiving of it. And so the introduction to the foot washing speaks about that. It speaks about the willingness to receive that act and the willingness to do it as a humble servant. And these are things that Jesus did, right? We have that sense of Jesus having his foot washed by Mary Magdalene when she has the perfume, the oil of nard, right? And so she does that, and he says, leave her alone, let her do it. She's anointing me for my burial. And that was the gospel reading, last week? And so he has received that great act of service. And then he turns around a few days later and performs that great act of service to all his disciples. Right? And that becomes a real defining moment. Like I said, an object lesson in saying, let me tell you once again what I've been telling you all these years. This is how you are supposed to be with one another. You are supposed to be the one on the ground washing the feet of another person. And remember, if you think your feet are gross now, back then, they're in sandals, it's a dusty world, they're not bathing regularly. I mean, it was not pleasant. It would not have been a nice little pedicure, right? It would have been pretty gross. And Jesus doing that would have literally been taking on the role of a servant. It was a servant's job, a slave's job, to wash people's feet of guests as a way of honoring them, welcoming them, showing them hospitality. Because it's nice when you got dirty feet to wash them. So it's a gift that's being offered. So we have a whole sort of opening section on that. And then we do commemorate the Lord's Supper by the readings that we have, the epistle, when St. Paul says, I passed on to you what was passed on to me. That on the night before he died, Jesus took bread, and when he was at table with his friends, blessed it, broke it, gave it to them, and said, this is my body, etc., etc. Now that we continue doing every week, but this is sort of that first time that we try to commemorate that as well. So foot washing, Last Supper. Then we start the transition from the light of the Lord's Supper, Last Supper, into the sort of gathering darkness. And we do that in a few ways. One, when we have completed communion, we do something called the reservation of the sacrament, which is where we take the consecrated bread and wine, the presence of Jesus, and we remove it from the main altar area and put it usually off to the side or in the tabernacle. And we do that in a formalized way, singing some very ancient hymns that were sung at these same services in old times as well. So we do that, and then we come back, and the service, again, is not over because it extends to the Easter Vigil, but then we do what we call the stripping of the altar, which is where we ceremonially take away all the accoutrements that are up at the altar area, from the seat cushions to the candlesticks to the cross to all of that. And I remember as a kid, and I hope this is true for you as well, it's kind of alarming how strange that starts to feel after a little while. You sort of, okay, we're losing this, and then all of a sudden that which you're used to seeing and have sort of taken into your subconscious is sort of, that's just what it looks like up there, is bare, sort of naked, up in front there. And all you have is the white stone here, and the lights come down, and that sense, there's that great line in John when he's talking his passion story. He said, they went out, and it was night. Right, so the darkness has come. Now, part of what we are able to do then is move the focus. So the service sort of ends with that. So the choir is chanting a psalm, and we're taking everything out. And the altar guild, those of you on the altar guild are here running back and forth, trying to put the things away so we know where they are when we need them again. But we're trying to create that sense of emptiness, of darkness gathering. And we've moved the focus over to our chapel, which is where we have, thanks to our lovely flower guild, developed something of a garden in which we have placed the reserved sacrament, the bread and the wine, the body and blood, so that there's an opportunity for folks to sit in that Gethsemane-like space with Jesus as he says, could you not watch with me 1 hour as I'm trying to work through some pretty heavy stuff here, and y'all are just sleeping. That's that moment. So that's not within the liturgy itself. It's sort of an addendum, but it is open for people to do. And Ed will tell you, here they used to do one that would go through the night, which we're not doing this year.
I'd like to take a quick unofficial survey.
Okay.
Raise your hand, you're not committed to this. Would you be willing to consider taking an hour through the night next year?
Overnight.
Think about it, doing it.
Think about it. Yeah. All right, we've got a few.
Because I've tried it for 2 years and it's been too hard, but next year, we're doing it.
Okay. Thus it shall be. But many churches will develop this practice, right, where people take a shift.
Right.
And they take an hour or something. In the olden days, just if you think an hour is too much, everybody would be there all night. And they'd be sitting there watching and waiting. But again, there's a powerful moment of being quiet in the church, alone or with a few other people, and really just contemplating the weight of that time. And there are prayers you can say that have been developed, litanies that can help fill the time, but really just challenging yourself, kind of, to abide by, what would it have been like to be with this guy on the night before he died? Not just any guy, this guy. What would that be like? So that's an opportunity, that's an option. We may do it next year overnight. But there is that practice that exists, and we will leave our space open for a while after the service for people to do that. Rick, question?
From someone who has done it in the past, not recently, it is very moving, it is well worth it. I don't know if we can do it.
Okay, good. A word on it. Margaret?
I was just gonna say similar, if you've ever sat with someone who has died.
Yes, yes.
And just watching.
Well, that sense of vigil, right? That sense of just being there, attending to the moment or the person, carries with it its own power to step into the intensity of it and not run away from it, but just abide by it. Okay? So that's all of Maundy Thursday. Foot washing, commemoration of the Last Supper, reservation of the sacrament, and the stripping of the altar leading into the watch, they call it, the holy hour in other places. Now, we don't go all night, but if you did, you'd be there on Good Friday, right, when you show up. And from there, the practices in Jerusalem, the ancient practices of walking the stations, the way of the cross, that dates back even further than the 380s, right? This practice of people going literally through and going where they think, at least, people, this is where this happened, this is where the trial was, this is where, and some extra stations emerge over history, things that are not in the scripture themselves, but have become part of the tradition. He falls 3 times. Women wipe his face. There's some extra canonical stations, let's call them. But there are 14 stations of the cross that have emerged over time that we will walk on Good Friday starting at 11 a.m. out in Stockley Gardens. And we don't have stations per se. If any of you are looking to be an artistic patron and develop stations for the parish to have, we can have a conversation, but we don't have those. What we do have is a wonderful long greenway where we walk up for half and up the way and then back. We sort of stop along the way, not at specific places, but along the way, mark that moment, and then end that liturgy in time to get ready for the regular liturgy of Good Friday. Rick, question?
Quick comment here.
Sorry.
Back when I was active duty, I actually walked the way of sorrow. I should pulled into Jerusalem. The streets of the old city are perhaps maybe not much wider than from here to that fire station.
Yeah.
So walking that, like traffic at that time, but you can imagine
Yeah.
the hustle and bustle of what it must have been.
Yep.
It's one of those things that's very moving. If anyone can get to Jerusalem, granted it's not possible really with what's going on now,
Right.
but make your pilgrimage.
Yeah.
It is worth it.
This is one of those senses of pilgrimage that the Christians have really engaged in, this Good Friday pilgrimage within Jerusalem itself. And it is, in most years, I don't know about this year, in most years it is a massive movement of humanity from station to station. It's a crush. And there's stories of that being true in the early centuries of the church, in the times when the Christians were not under persecution. Because it would sort of pop up and down depending on if the Roman Empire wanted a scapegoat or not. Yeah, Randall.
A story.
Yeah,
When
sure.
I was growing up, my grandparents used to take us every summer and we'd go somewhere. They were awesome because there was never a map or a plan. Let's just go.
Cool.
We ended up stopping for lunch in a little park one time, and I saw a cross on the top of a mountain. And I told my grandparents, "Let's go up to that cross." And they were like, "No, we're too old. You go, have fun." I think I was probably 12 years old. And as I walked up that, it went the path went around the mountain the whole way up to that cross, and it was the life-size bronze statues
Wow.
of the station.
Wow. That's cool.
I can try and find where that was someday. That's in southern Colorado.
Okay.
It's unbelievable.
That's cool. No, this has captured the imagination, right? This idea of trying to reenact the literal steps of Jesus as he goes from the trial to the tomb.
Wasn't it started by St. Francis of Assisi?
It actually predates that, probably. I mean, maybe the more formalized way we do it here, but the idea of walking the way of the cross in Jerusalem well earlier than Francis in the 1300s or whatever he was, or 1200s. So I think it is earlier. But yes, so we have that practice. We will do that here, and we'll do it outside. We have sort of a wooden cross that's carryable, and we will go along as a group. We usually have a good turnout for that, 30 or 40 folks. Becomes an important part of their Good Friday as well. And then you have the chance to stay for the 12 p.m. solemn liturgy of Good Friday. And the main components of that, well, actually, interestingly, in the first centuries, Good Friday gets, like I said, extended into resurrection celebration. So they become sort of one. Here we hold a very distinct Good Friday as non-resurrection. We don't talk like there's anything good going on at all on this Good Friday. In the 380s, when Eugenia went there, from 8 to noon, there would be cross veneration with pieces of the true cross. We can question that, but 8 to 12, you went and venerated the cross. From 12 to 3, there was a service, those 3 hours that Jesus is hanging upon the cross in his final hours. And then from 3 o'clock on, you would go to the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre, or the Church of the Holy Sepulchre area, which is above or near where the tomb where Jesus was thought to have been laid. And you would stay there overnight into Saturday, and that would get you ready for the Easter Vigil and such. For our service, it starts very simply. There's no lay people can lead this service. You don't need to be ordained because there's no blessing, there's no absolution of sins, there's no celebration of the Eucharist. So this is a very stripped down service. We enter in silence, we just sort of walk in from the side, we have a few readings, and then what you get is, in our case, the chanting of the John version of the Passion, which is rich and wonderful. It is also, unfortunately, and we make a note about this in the bulletin, the way in which John's gospel emerges in a time when, as you remember Michael Panitz last week talking about, the split starts to emerge between Judaism and Christianity as a form of Judaism, not called Christianity yet, the way of Jesus, the followers of the way. John is emerging probably around 100 AD in that time period when that is becoming a more acrimonious relationship. And so he is very keen to ascribe blame to the Jews, which he writes broadly. And the sad truth of that is that that language, that ethos, that idea has been used by Christians to execute acts of anti-Semitism throughout history, from the time it was written onwards. So we try to understand a little bit of that context so that when we hear that, we do not make the same mistake. So we have a note about that in the bulletin, so just note that as you go through. We do it chanted here. If you were at the 8 o'clock, it's very similar to the breakdown of parts, so to speak. There's a narrator, there's Jesus, and then there's one singer, speaker, who does all the other parts together. And it's chanted, it's long, right? It's the full story, so we're going to listen to it. It's Good Friday. I don't have a lot of patience for people saying like that was too long, because it's kind of supposed to be uncomfortable at that point. Obviously, if it's a problem for you medically or anything like that, just do what you need to do to survive. But just know, we're going to listen to the whole thing, and it's going to be chanted beautifully, so that should help along the way. We then move into something called the Solemn Collects, which have an old roots, deep roots back to those early centuries of the church. This language doesn't necessarily. These are prayers that have been collected over time. There are petitions followed by collects. So you get, it's like an extended version of the prayers of the people. You get an extended version of it, and then you extended version of petition, and then you say a collect, which sort of summarizes those. Those of you who remember Padre Grotuma's talk about collects, it's sort of meant to encapsulate, to collect all those prayers into one. So that is, there's a pattern that happens there. That's really the substance of the service. There is a sermon after the John Gospel, but there's no creed necessarily. It's like those prayers become an important part of it, as does what we do here, the veneration of the cross. And we do not have the true cross. We're not even pretending to have a piece of the true cross, but we have a cross that has been fashioned. And after those solemn collects, that cross is brought in from the back of the church and ceremoniously put into a little stand at the front, at which point people are invited to come forward and in some act of their choosing of veneration, whether it's kneeling, whether it's touching, kissing, bowing, whatever it may be, what's most comfortable, you get to be that person who comes to the foot of the cross and do what you need to do in that moment. And to me, that's some of the most powerful moments of this week that people get to participate in. I'm seeing some heads nodding from those who have done it. It's powerful personally, and it's also powerful to watch people do that and have their moment with in that moment that is so terrible and so beautiful at the same time. So that is that takes some time too to get people through, and that's okay. We've got some beautiful music that'll be being sung and chanted while that's going, and so if you feel like you want to do that, don't be shy and say, oh, well, the line's long, or everyone needs to get to lunch, or whatever it may be. We're here to be in church for this 1 hour, and that's what it'll do. We then move, once that is wrapped up, we have a very abbreviated administration of simply the bread of communion. It is not a celebration. We're not blessing anything. It is pre-blessed, usually blessed on Maundy Thursday in the evening, and anything that is left of the host is brought out and administered very perfunctorily to people to come forward with the idea that we are trying to spend it all down so that there is no Jesus left, so to speak, by the time that service is over. Because we're trying to encapsulate for a 24-hour period what it must have felt like for those disciples to think he's really dead and he's gone. And so we have this very ritualized way of doing that, but the instinct behind it is to say there is nothing there. The sanctuary lamp, which is lit next to the tabernacle where the elements are, the consecrated elements are stored, is out. There's no Jesus there. And so we've got to hold that emptiness, that space, for a little while. And then we leave in silence. There's no dismissal. You take your bread, there's one final prayer, and then we're on our way. There's a brief, yeah, Frank.
One of the most memorable moments of the Good Friday service was as the service was ending, my father would take the altar book and slam it shut.
Yeah.
And then walk out with the altar book, marking the end of the Good Friday recognition beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. So that sense of closure, so to speak, the tomb, the rock has been rolled into the front of the tomb. It's sealed up, and there's no reason to expect anything that would change. So why did the ladies go back? Yeah, Ed.
In the past, we've seen where the cross is, when it strikes the ground, it's very profound. And,
Yes.
And also the striking with a hammer or a spike or something, that sound.
Yeah. Some different places have different ways of doing that. If you've been to a Tenebrae service, which is not one we've done, there's a whole moment there where the stone is rolled and the organ makes a big noise. So yeah, using noise, using word. I mean, it's another way we try to bring these stories to life a little bit. Yeah. Paige, did you have a hand up?
I was going to say, maybe a year from now, when this season comes around again, we could have some programming on passion plays.
Oh.
I've been very fortunate to get to cover Oberammergau in Germany over a course of 30 years.
Wow.
So in other words, I've seen it 3 times.
Okay, well, maybe you could lead us in some stories on passion. Would you be willing? Yeah. But that's fascinating. And
It is, and you have the whole issue of anti-Semitism built
right.
into that.
Especially in Germany, yeah.
And there are, of course, different versions to that, but that play in Oberammergau was kind of the...
Yeah, that's the sort of the shining star of those versions of that. But there have long been histories of this, and the homily may gesture somewhat towards the idea of why we would want to tell this story in this way, like, you know, the whole ethos behind drama. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. Nancy?
I don't know if anybody's been to Seville, Sevilla during Semana Santa, which is now going on. That's, has anybody done that? Seen the big floats that they carry through the streets?
Yeah.
I mean, they weigh a couple of tons, these floats, but they have these very realistic looking, you know, statues and doing the sort of the Stations of the Cross and Mary. I mean, has anybody seen those?
I've seen pictures. I've never been, yeah.
It's
My-
amazing.
my-
And
my wife is a
outpouring
Philip.
of emotion that, you know, and these men that get underneath these floats and they're carrying, you know,
Yeah.
barefoot in some of them, you know, it's all about the suffering.
Right, trying to reenact some of that. Sometimes a little fetishistically, I will say. There's some, you know, people who try to crawl their way through so they can get all bloodied up.
But it's a,
But yeah.
But
No, it's
I mean,
true.
It's quite moving.
Yeah. Rick, you're going to say?
Yeah, my wife is a Filipino. You take a look at the way, what you were saying, I saw that one Hollywood when we were over there.
Okay.
And the Philippines, the way they do some of this stuff puts us to shame.
They really
Because they are
do.
very much into it.
Yeah,
Strong Roman Catholic, and
yeah, some
they just,
deep passion in the passion.
yeah, especially just take, when you get a chance to go out to YouTube, take a look at how the Philippines celebrate Holy Week.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm
I'm
gonna keep us moving here. Bill, last thought before we move on, because we gotta get to the vigil real quick.
Okay, in one church with one priest, when we left on Good Friday, we were given a spike.
Ooh,
And he would put it point down into our palm.
in your palm.
And then give it to us.
Yeah.
And so on.
But it's interesting, like all these different practices that emerge to try to bring to life, so to speak, this story, this experience of Jesus' experience, the disciples, I mean, all of that, that's what this week is trying to do, from the foot washing to the veneration of the cross to this Easter Vigil. There is a brief service on Holy Saturday in the morning. It's just sort of can be a really great way to sort of gather together, like say, woof, that was pretty intense. We're holding this empty space. What do we do with it? And the answer is nothing. On the Sabbath day they rested, according to the commandment. There's an emptiness between Good Friday and the resurrection. But, and I won't discredit the earliest service of all of these that we do is the Easter Vigil. Easter Vigil is the oldest liturgy we have, and it was the service for hundreds of years within the church. The service for baptism, the only one where you could get baptized. You'd spend a year and then you would go, and that would be the service where you did it, because it does this marvelous job of trying to draw a parallel between the Exodus, the way in which God saved the people of Israel through water, and the way in which God passed over from death to life. So the service starts in darkness. We kindle this new fire, literally, in the back of the church. And we bless this candle, the Paschal candle, which will be the singular candle from which all other light is meant to go out into the world. See the metaphoric resonances there, right? And then you have the opportunity, then we bless the candle with a long chant called the Exultet. And then we sit and listen in dark, more or less, to stories from the Old Testament, one of which always has to be the story of the Passover. But we talk about creation, we talk about Passover. There's many that have been chosen before. There's 9 that are assigned as possible in our prayer book. We're going to do 5 of those, I think. Yes, 5. And that's literally the way they're introduced is, let us hear a record of God's saving acts in history, so that while we are huddled in darkness of the tomb, we hold a little bit of hope that God can still yet act. So we listen to these stories, and we have some responses, some songs, and some prayers. And then we have baptism, still in the dark. And we've got 2 people being baptized at this later service, also at the family service earlier. Later service that we're able to then go ahead and do the ceremony of baptism, at the end of which, if you were in the olden days, you would have timed it out so that you started the vigil in the middle of the night, and so you would time out sunrise to match the moment in the service where you thought the baptisms would be finished. Because then they have what they call the Great Easter Acclamation. And all the lights in the church are thrown on, and the organ kicks up, and they start ringing bells, and all of a sudden it's Easter. Because they're trying to encapsulate that moment of moving from death to life, from darkness to light. And that, in and of itself, becomes its own remarkable moment, especially if you're not expecting it, so I'm sorry, but I remember my first parish, there was a kid we were baptizing who was probably 8 years old. He didn't know anything about what was going on. It happened, and the look on his face was exactly the look that they've been going for thousands of years at this service. We're like, he was just floored. So that's what's happening here. And then it's Easter. The flowers have been put up on the altar, and now you can see them. The candles are lit. We have an abbreviated liturgy of the word. We have a homily, and then we're into communion. And it's full on, and we're shouting hallelujahs, and we're doing the whole thing because we have passed over in this time from darkness to light, from death to life. So that is what the Easter Vigil is trying to encapsulate. The cynics would say people couldn't hold their water and wait till Easter morning, and so they decided to develop a service that happened the night before and say, well, this counts too. But the reality is this has been a very holy evening for, again, since the beginning of the church's life. And that it was an all-night vigil that culminated, that climaxed in the breaking of the sun over the horizon or into the church or wherever it would be. So some places still do. The monastery of Society of St. John the Evangelist up in Boston, they start at 4 a.m. And they'll do all the readings and all the responses. And then when they're done, the church is in light when it was in darkness, and not because they threw on the light, but because the planets have realigned their courses, right? And so that's powerful in its own way. We don't make you do that here. So you're welcome. Yeah, Chris.
We are going to have, is it 11 o'clock on Sunday, Easter?
So yes, so then we get to Easter morning, which by then the clergy are like, this is easy, because it's just Sunday with brass. And so it's big, it's bold, it's beautiful, and it's celebratory. There's no transitioning from death to life. It's life on life on life. And yes, we do shift our times from 9 to 9 and 11. And both those services are full if this is your first Easter with us. So try to get there early. There is always a quick turnover between the 9. We'll probably end about 10:15, and then people will start getting seated for the 11 o'clock. There, 11 o'clock has incense. The Easter Vigil also has incense as well. Final questions for me before we go try to celebrate Palm Sunday together. Is it helpful to hear a little bit of what to expect on this? Get a little bit of the background? Good. So there's always reasons for what we do. Sometimes they're good reasons, sometimes they're not. But in this case, there are a lot of good reasons and a lot of ancient practices. And this story comes to life in ways that I hope it will for you in these days to come. So thank you guys for being here this morning, and we'll go do it. Thank you.